I drew up the terms myself. That is the part I have never quite forgiven myself for, though I have tried, and I was his oldest friend, and I believed I was acting in his interest, and I was wrong on the most important point of all. His name was Cavan Ashmore, the Duke of Aldenmere, and I had known him since we were boys reading Latin together in the same drafty schoolroom in the north. By the time I retired from medicine and took up the quiet life of a country gentleman at Aldenmere's neighboring estate, he was 41 years old, feared across 3 counties, and had just received from me a piece of news that would have unmade a lesser man. I told him on a Tuesday afternoon in November in the library, with the fire going and the rain coming in sideways off the moors. I told him his heart was failing. Not immediately, not next month, but the mechanism was imperfect, and in my best estimation he had perhaps 18 months, perhaps 2 years if he was careful and the winter was not severe. He listened without moving, then he said, "I have no heir." "No," I said. "I need one." "Yes." He was quiet for a long time after that. When he spoke again, his voice was entirely steady, which was the most unsettling thing about Cavan Ashmore. He was never more frightening than when he was composed. He said, "Draw up something, a term arrangement. A woman willing to give me 6 months, produce a child if Providence allows, and accept a settled income and her freedom in exchange. My solicitor will vet the legal portions. I want the terms fair. I want no coercion." I said, "Cavan." He said, "Draw up something, Karen." So I did. The woman was found through the most unlikely of channels, not through the London marriage brokers, not through the county families who would have sold a daughter gladly for a dukedom, but through a letter from a clergyman in Westshire who had heard, through 3 removes of gossip, that the Duke of Aldenmere was in need of an arrangement of the unusual kind. The clergyman wrote that he knew of a young woman, his late friend's niece, Miss Lydia Calloway, who was a lady's companion by occupation, the orphaned child of an estate steward, educated and self-possessed, and currently encumbered by a creditor who had purchased her uncle's debts and was applying an unpleasant pressure. She was not, the clergyman made clear, on the market for a duke. She was not on the market for anything. But she was, he said, a woman of uncommon good sense, and she deserved better than what was coming for her, and he would write to her if the Duke wished it. The clergyman was a good man, and he loved her like a daughter. The Duke read the letter twice, handed it back to me, and said, "Write to the clergyman." She came to Aldenmere Hall on a gray Thursday in December, in a hired coach, with 1 trunk and a hat that was not quite warm enough for the moors. I was the one who received her in the east drawing-room. The Duke had decided, wisely I thought, that the terms ought to be presented by a third party first, so that she could decline without the embarrassment of declining a duke to his face. I had expected someone apologetic, grateful perhaps, or nervous. She was neither. She sat in the wing-back chair across from me with her gloved hands in her lap and her back entirely straight, and she listened to the whole of the proposal, the 6 months, the heir, the settled income, the freedom, without a word of interruption. When I finished, she was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I have one condition." I said, "I am authorized to discuss terms." She said, "He must be honest with me, always, about the state of his health, about the terms, about what he expects and what he does not. I have managed on very little my whole life, and I am not afraid of difficulty, but I cannot manage dishonesty. If he agrees to that, then I will agree to the rest." I looked at her for a moment. She looked steadily back. I went and fetched the Duke. He came in without ceremony, which surprised her. I saw it in the brief stillness before she rose. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, dark-haired, and he wore the expression he always wore in rooms where something important was about to happen, which was no expression at all. He sat, she sat, and he said, without preamble, "Mr. Fent tells me you have a condition." "Yes," she said. "Honesty. Always." He studied her. She did not look away. He said, "I have one condition in return." She waited. He said, "You must tell me when I have failed at it." She was still for a moment, then she said, "That I can do." They were married by special license on the 23rd of December in the Aldenmere chapel, with myself and the housekeeper as witnesses and a thin frost on the windows. She wore her best gown, which was a quiet dove gray, and she carried no flowers. He stood beside her and said the words with the same steadiness he brought to everything, and she said them back with a composure that, I confess, moved me rather more than I had expected a business arrangement to do. The first week they were civil. The second week they were cautious. By the third week something had shifted, though I could not have told you precisely when or how. He had begun, I noticed, to take his afternoon walk at the same hour she took hers. She had begun, I noticed, to appear in the library at the same hour he reviewed his correspondence. Neither of them remarked upon it. I remarked upon it to no one, but I watched with the attention of a man who has observed a great many things and learned to hold his tongue. It was in the 5th week that I heard the first real conversation between them. I was not eavesdropping, or I was not intending to eavesdrop, but the drawing-room door was ajar and I was passing with a book, and I heard her voice, quiet and precise, saying, "The terms gave you 6 months, Your Grace. We are 5 weeks in." His voice, "I am aware of the arithmetic. I only want to be certain you are not," a pause, "forgetting what the arrangement is." A longer pause from him, then, "No, I am not forgetting." And something in the way he said it, too careful, too measured, the voice of a man being scrupulously honest, told me that the forgetting, in fact, was well underway on both sides, and that neither of them was ready to say so. He told her about his heart in the 2nd month. I had not known he intended to tell her. The terms had not required it, but she had asked him quietly one evening in the library whether he was in some pain. She had noticed he sometimes stopped at the top of the stairs, one hand on the banister. He had stood there for a moment in the lamplight, and then he had told her. He told her plainly and without self-pity, the diagnosis, the timeline, the physician's estimate. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Thank you for telling me." He said, "You asked." She said, "I did." And then, "I would like to continue being told." He said, "Yes, all right." I found out later. He told me she had not cried, or not until she was back in her own rooms, and then she had cried rather hard, which the maid had reported to the housekeeper with some concern, and the housekeeper had reported to me because she was not sure what to make of a woman who wept for a man she had agreed to treat as a business arrangement. I was not sure what to make of it either, except that I was growing surer by the week that the arrangement had ceased to resemble itself. By the 4th month, they argued about the tenant cottages on the east pasture, which had been in want of repair for 2 years and which she had, with a characteristic efficiency that the Duke found simultaneously irritating and arresting, calculated the cost of fixing before he had asked her to. She had done it during a single wet morning at the estate desk, 3 columns of figures in her small, clear hand, and presented it to him at supper without comment. He said the cost was premature. She said the cold was not premature for the families living in them. He said the budget for the quarter was already committed. She said she knew that and had found where the savings were, which was a page 2 of the same document. He looked at page 2. He said she was not his steward. She said no, she was his wife, which was a thing they had both been careful not to say directly until that moment, and the word fell between them with an unexpected weight, not a legal word in that instant, but a real one. He looked at her. She looked back at him, perfectly steady, waiting to see what he would do with it. He fixed the cottages. In the 5th month, she was sitting by the window in the library one afternoon when he came to sit across from her, and he did not open his book, and after a while she looked up and he said, "The terms expire in 4 weeks. She said, "Yes." He said, "I am going to be honest with you." She waited. He said, "I should like you to stay." A pause. "Not as a matter of terms, not as a matter of the original arrangement. I should like," and here his voice, which had never once faltered in my hearing, caught very slightly, and I believe that was the moment she understood how much it cost him. He said, "I should like you to stay because I find I cannot account for the house without you in it, and because I am not certain what I am doing from 1 hour to the next when you are not somewhere on the premises, and because the physician I have trusted with my health for 20 years told me recently that whatever I had been given to work with, the past 5 months have done it no harm at all, which he attributed to." He stopped. Then he said settled happiness was medicinal, which I thought was a very unscientific diagnosis, but I find I cannot quarrel with the evidence. She was quiet for a long while. Outside, the first pale light of April was coming through the library windows, and the sound of the estate moving through its mourning, a horse in the yard, a door somewhere, the distant bell from the chapel came through in the stillness. Then she said, "You should know that I have been in violation of the terms for some time." He said, "What terms?" She said the arrangement was 6 months and then freedom. "I have not—" She stopped. Then, with the particular precision she brought to everything that mattered, "I have not wanted freedom, not from this, not for some while." He crossed the room. That is the image I carry with me, all these years later, not the wedding, not the cottages, not the 4th month's argument with its falling weight of the word wife. It is Cavan Ashmore, the coldest and most feared duke in the north of England, crossing a library floor at 9:30 in the morning, and taking Miss Lydia Calloway's hands in both of his carefully, as though she might dissolve, and saying, "Then stay." She said, "You'll have to ask better than that." He said, "Stay, please, as long as I am here and after if you will have the place." She said, "Yes, all right." The terms expired the following week. No one mentioned them. The settled income was signed over to a school in the village that she had already been quietly funding from the household accounts. They were still at Aldenmere Hall the following winter, and the winter after that. When the physician gave his next assessment, Cavan was 43 and the estimate had lengthened considerably, which the physician continued to attribute, with no scientific rigor whatsoever, to settled happiness. Cavan told me this over dinner one evening, and said it was the least defensible medical opinion he had ever been given. She was sitting across the table from him when he said it. She looked at him with the quiet, level look I had first seen in the wing-back chair. The one that had told me, even then, before the terms were signed, before the gray wedding and the winter and the cottages and the long, honest conversations in the lamplight, that whoever had written that cold bargain had not known what they were setting in motion. I had written it. I know now what I set in motion. I set in motion the only thing that ever did him any good. He lived to see the estate restored, the cottages rebuilt, and 3 winters more than I had promised him. And if you ask me to identify the medicine responsible, I would give you the same unscientific answer I received, and I would not apologize for it at all.